Welcome to the Nerve Guys podcast, where we discuss movement, performance, and rehabilitation through the lens of the brain and nervous system. The Nerve Guys podcast is hosted by Gareth Kelly and James McCambridge. To find out more about the Nerve Guys or to book into our online or in-person training programs, please visit thenerveguys.co.uk. The Nerve Guys podcast is sponsored by Elite Vision Sticks. Every day, athletes of all levels are reaching their full performance potential with Elite Vision Sticks. Pick up yours today. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Nerve Guys podcast. Today, I am joined by Rosamund Martin. Rosamund does a whole load of things. Has worked in circus theater, Pilates. The thing I'm really looking forward to speak about today is actually her work in Feldenkrais. And I'm actually going to start today's episode with a bit of a testimonial because Rosamund is also who I go to see when I end up in pain. Doesn't happen very often. I don't. I tend to, try and sort out a lot of my stuff, but when I do need, especially some hands-on work, I've decided Feldenkrais works really well for me, and Rosamund specifically is an excellent practitioner. So, hello, Rosamund. Joining you today. How are you doing?
Good, thanks. That was a nice intro. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, definitely true. I think I told you years ago when we had a session that I would write a testimonial and I forgot. So this is me trying to make up for that. Well, I wanted to kind of start off because some people listening, I feel like Feldenkrais is one of those things where you've either heard of it and you know a lot about it, or it's just a made-up word that you're not really sure. So do you want to just talk through a little bit about what that means? Like, what do you actually do when you say you're a Feldenkrais practitioner?
Yeah, it's a difficult question because it can be so many things. And it's the answer, like every practitioner will tell you, the answer is different depending on who you're talking to or who you want to make it relevant to. But basically, it's a way of working with the body. And when I say body, I mean self. Body includes brain, includes nervous system, includes patterns of thinking, because of course that's also the brain, and everything that you think is reflected and also moving through your body somehow. So it's really a way of dealing with the whole system of the self. But through movement and sensation. So Moshe Feldenkrais, who's the originator of the Feldenkrais method, would break down action. Any action is composed of thinking, feeling, as in emotions, sensing, as in sensations, and movement. So thinking, feeling, sensing, moving. And in Feldenkrais, we work with the sensing and the moving, but to get to all of those things. So you can't change any of your pattern of thinking without that having some effect on your body. You can't change your way of moving or doing something, acting or being in the world without that also changing how you feel, how you move, etc. So like you could, psychologists might work on the thinking and the feeling. Somebody who's just working with movement training might work on the movement, or might work on the movement and the thinking, especially if there's an element of kind of empowerment or motivation. How you think about what you're doing affects how you do it, all of those things. And we use a lot of sensation. So we'd call it a somatic method, meaning that you're not just doing the thing, you're also engaging your brain, your thinking in a kind of mindful practice. So you're experiencing how you do the thing. So we're looking at movement, how movement manifests what somebody's thinking, feeling, etc. And that sounds a little bit esoteric, but, you know, with a lot of the time, it's actually just very functional. You know, a lot of people come to Feldenkrais because nothing else is working. You know, I think we'll probably talk a little bit about chronic conditions, but like when you've tried everything, when the physio is like helped up to a certain degree and you've hit a barrier, or when your training has reached a certain level and you've hit a plateau, you know. So it's like when you need somehow a fresh approach to something. And, you know, then it might be that we're looking at the component parts of the self, meaning you want to lift your elbow, but your arm, you want to reach, but something gets stuck. But the sort of like old school way would be like, oh, you can't move your shoulder. Okay, well, we'll give you this number of reps of this and this number of reps of this and whatever it is. And to look at that area. Whereas in Feldenkrais, we would go like, okay, first of all, I can't fix you. Like, you are the expert in your body. You know what it's like to be in your body. So we start with that. We start with you becoming more aware of what it is you're already doing that might be causing that thing to happen in the first place. And you start to become more aware of things. Okay, well, I can't lift it here, but I can lift it here. Okay, so what does that feel like? Okay, well, when I lift it here, I can feel my ribs turning. Oh, and then I feel my neck's freer. Like, oh, and I was locking my jaw here. Or like, you know, are you moving your pelvis? Can you breathe freely? So it's really like connecting all of the dots of the body to create more possibilities for movement. And creating more possibilities for movement means creating more possibilities for being in the world, for doing what you want to do, whether that's like getting up and down comfortably, or talking and relating to other people comfortably, or just sleeping better, or achieving your next training goal, or whatever it is.
Yeah, I guess that is it's like that jigsaw puzzle, but it does, because of the thinking, feeling, sensing part as well, is like if you're improving the movement part, that probably is going to have a knock-on effect on the other bits, and vice versa. Like if you improve the way you think, I think it's Tony Robbins actually has a whole bit that he either does or used to do, which was just all about, you know, getting people to try and touch their toes. And it was just, all right, let's change how you're thinking about it. And people would just see an immediate change in their range. And that was his big example of, you know, oh, your mind is holding you back from certain things. But we see it all the time that, yeah, like when movement is a problem, like you said, the physios, my experience of physios in the past was always, oh, I've got that shoulder problem. Okay, here's these exercises to do with the band. But next time when I go back, if I say, all right, I did those exercises every week, it didn't work. And it's like, okay, well, then you didn't do it enough. That's not really, well, maybe it's the answer. You know, maybe if you just keep going, eventually you'll get there. But it's hard. It's hard to say. To me, it really does make sense to say, actually, you should look at the whole thing. Well,
yeah.
Your brain, your body, everything's already connected.
Yeah.
The only reason it's different is because we gave it different labels in the first place.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I think what you're dealing with, perhaps, is, you know, what you were talking about and how your thinking can affect what you're doing, how you're moving, etc. You know, we're talking about habit. So in Feldenkrais, we're talking about habit, how you do what you do to a large degree without being conscious that that's how you're doing that thing, you know. So we're zooming in, and that one of the things that's really, I think, quite unique to Feldenkrais is that we want to create what another Feldenkrais practitioner, Ruth Yalon, called the greenhouse conditions for learning. So we're not saying like, do this number of reps, push your range, you know, try harder, change your way of thinking to achieve more. We're saying like, get rid of ambition, make yourself safe. You know, it's a very sort of, it's before the word trauma informed became kind of buzz. before the idea of complex trauma even became something people were talking about, or, you know, around the same time that PTSD was being discovered, really, Feldenkrais was already kind of working in such a way that is like, first of all, you got to feel safe, you know? Feldenkrais himself, Moshe Feldenkrais himself, is actually famously quite grumpy guy. Like, that doesn't necessarily just mean being nice to everybody, but it means, you know, giving you, the person that's doing this thing, you've got the agency, you've got the control. You know, I'm not going to crack your back like if you go and see some other practitioner. I'm going to work with you within your range of comfort. You get to say what's okay and what's not okay. You know, you get to say, yes, this is interesting to me, or like, I don't want to go there. And when we start working hands-on, of course, I would say all of that before working hands-on with somebody, like, tell me what's good, what's not good. You know, like, I even sometimes kind of have a practice with people where they get to practice telling me, like, no, please don't do that, because it's really difficult for people to say that. You know, when you're in reality, when you're working with somebody, so much of the time we're like, oh God, I got to go along with this because now I'm in the middle of it. Oh, this is weird. Oh, so it's really a case of, first of all, like, empowering people to realize, but like again and again and again, how like it's up to you. You can go in as much as you want. You can come out as much as you want. So we're looking at like your range of comfort, what feels safe, and then challenging that. Like, how much do you want to challenge that? Do you want to push your range a little bit more? But in that case, let's work at a slow pace with this movement so that you're completely safe. We never like go so fast into a new thing that you might come smashing up against your end of range or against your boundary, whether that's psychological or in terms of the range of the joint, or, you know, whatever it is. We don't want you to come smacking up against something potentially traumatic. You know, we want to go like, how does this feel? And how does this feel? So it's really, really exploratory. That's why it's this mindful somatic thing. And then the teacher, so in this instance me, whether I'm guiding with the voice, which would be a group class or an awareness through movement class, where the teacher is guiding with the voice, or in a hands-on class, which is called functional integration, the teacher is guiding with their hands. And when you're working with hands, you know, as I was saying, you go through this verbal process of telling somebody, it's up to you, you know, we can do a bit of this. If your body likes it, if you likes it, cool, don't worry. If you don't, we'll find another way of working. Like, there's infinite possibilities of how we can approach anything. So we can always find another way if this isn't working for you, you know. And then you can stop using the words and you can have that communication between your two nervous systems. So, you know, when I'm doing these movements with somebody's body, it's like a conversation. I might do something with the arm or the shoulder, and it's like the nervous system will respond and tell me, like, there'll be something that the person I'm working with isn't consciously not letting me go there. But if I'm listening with my hands, I can feel, well, they don't really want me to go there. So I'm like, okay, cool. So this way, like, oh yeah. And their body goes, yeah, that's okay. And then the more we expand on that, yes, the more possibility we can create. So again, we're kind of like going with what the person already does, making them more aware of what they already do. And then, you know, not correcting. We're not in the, because as you said at the beginning, like, I've also trained as a Pilates teacher. You know, that's like the language of correction. That's like the language of physio or teaching ballet, or, you know, like, it should look like this, you should do it like this. And in Feldenkrais, we're going like, well, okay, nobody is the same as anybody else. There might be some mythical optimal, but where are you at? What are you bringing? You know, and how can we work with that? And then how can we expand on your potential from that place? You know, so it's different for everybody, even though it's kind of the same for everybody, you know? Yeah,
I find optimal is, I think people think too much about optimal in terms of what they should be. And I actually think the only reason we've ever used optimal things was for the coaches, the teachers. It's like when you're just learning to be a football coach, you learn the right way to pass a ball. When you're learning to be a physio, you learn the right way that your hips are supposed to be. because it's easier to have a label and then work from that than it is to just go, hey, everyone's hips are different. Good luck. And oh, cool. Yeah, this is a good starting point, but actually it's not realistic and nobody ever gets there. And people forget that. People think, oh, it's optimal to like, that was for the physio. That wasn't for you. Your hips are how your hips are. You're not supposed to be in one way or another. You exist how you exist. Okay?
Yeah, and I think something really that we really struggle with culturally is this immediate attachment of value or of valence, like if it's good or bad, or if I feel good or I feel bad about that, rather than just like, okay, well that's what, so that optimal kind of gives us that problem of like, oh, well, I'm suboptimal. It's like, yeah, welcome to being human, because even if somebody, we're good at doing what we do, whether that's something that we do intentionally, like training to a really high level as a gymnast, for example, or whether it's something that we do unintentionally, like, we get good at sitting in a certain posture because we do that all the time without realizing we're doing it. And like, the more you get good at that thing that you're a specialist in, the more you sacrifice other things that, but when we look at like the optimal functioning gymnast, for example, and this always just struck me really strongly when we were working in circus, you're making a choice to be good at something, and then you like see the ballet dancer or the circus artist or the gymnast like go off stage and they're like hobbling back to the dressing room, like, bandaging everything, and like can't sit comfortably, can't get up or down comfortably, can't walk comfortably, can't sleep or lie down comfortably. Like, obviously I'm exaggerating, that's not the case for everybody at all.
Sometimes not exaggerating.
But I mean, I'm not saying that's the case for everybody, and I mean,
yeah,
I hope not. But it's so common because you get good at doing the thing you do the most. So of course, and people I think often don't realize that our body grows around that. Literally the shape of the bone, literally the shape of the hip joint will be shaped as we grow, and as we then continue to use our body throughout the length of our life, we grow according to how we're using our joints and our muscles. And if we change how we're using them, they change shape. Like we literally change shape, So our movement is kind of bringing us into being, and yeah, if you want to be a specialist gymnast or performer of some kind, or even, whatever, golfer or yoga practitioner, you're going to prioritize doing different things than if you want to be a really good public speaker or a really good marketing campaigner or somebody who's going to sit at a computer all day. And regardless of what you're doing, we can make you maybe a bit more comfortable doing that, because we're thinking of habit. It's like, there's nothing wrong with doing that thing. You're doing that thing that way because it has worked for you. That's how a habit is generated, right? I move in this certain way, or I think in this certain way, or I behave in a certain way because that has served a purpose. That's allowed me to get to where I am right now. So that was intelligent, And it's like walking a path. If you walk the same path again and again and again and again, it starts to wear down. And it's like, oh, well, maybe we don't want to just wear down only one path. We don't want to only have this range of movement at the joint. We don't want to really get stuck in our thinking and completely not be able to see any other way. So especially, and I think this is why people often end up coming to Feldenkrais when they're experiencing a problem, because you only become aware of how your habit is getting to the stage where it's limiting you to the point of being dangerous or unhelpful, when your body is going like help, do something different, you've got to try a different strategy now, So
yes, telling you to pay attention. Like I guess most of the time maybe it's just because of advertising, or maybe it's how people always were. I wasn't alive long enough to know a time that was different, but like it does seem like we feel like we're supposed to be focused 99% of the time on everything outside and 1% on the inside. And I found, like, my experience of doing the sessions with you, especially the one-to-one sessions, was like that idea of zooming in on yourself was very apparent. Like, I was really surprised because I consider myself someone who knows a lot about my body. Like, I consider myself someone who devotes time all the time to, paying attention to what's going on, paying attention to my movement. And I was like, oh, cool. Yeah, I'm already good at that. And then so to have, like, you were doing, I think the first thing you told me to do most of the times I've seen you was stand up, eyes closed, and literally just move side to side, but really slightly. And straight away, even like before anything else, I go like, oh, whoa, that's weird. I've got all this rotation. My knees are rolling in. And then you had me up on a table, and it's like, all right, so just, lie down, relax. And I was like, yep, I feel pretty relaxed. See, by the end of that session, like the difference in my, like, holy shit, I was so tense. Like my legs had completely rotated outwards. Everything felt like I could feel more points of contact on the table by the end than from the beginning. But in the beginning, I would have told you, if it was like, is this as relaxed as you can possibly be? I was like, oh yeah, there's no way any part of my body could reasonably go any further. I wonder, like, do you have a process? Are there set things that you kind of are always looking for in people when they come to you?
That's a good question. There are always patterns or certain phenomena that maybe you want to explore. And then it's always a response to the person that you end up working with. Quite a lot of Feldenkrais, it's functional. So because, of course, everything is, and anything you want to do in life, is going to be combined. Is going to be a combination of functional movements. Like, even if you take it to an extreme in sport or performance, it's still just a combination of these movements, which are actually really basic. Like any movement practitioner will work with flexion and extension, rotation, side bending, kind of simple stuff like that. And then we also bring in a lot of developmental movement patterns, again, just because those are like the building blocks. If you're walking, you're shifting weight. We learn to do that by crawling. We learn to crawl by creeping on the belly. We only get to creep on the belly once we can roll over. It's all about shifting weight. So there are kind of like lots of possible ways to go, possible things to clarify for somebody. So it might be that, like, we begin just by looking at simply how do you look up and how do you look down, and you might begin with something, or as you said we did together, like, how do you shift weight, so you take it down to an initial test movement. Like, we do a test, not to see how good are you at this, like you're going to pass or fail a test, but like a genuine scientific test, like, what happens if you do this, and what can we learn about that? And so you shift weight, or you look up and you look down. You take a very basic, simple movement, and it reveals kind of so much about how that person is using themselves, which parts of themselves are already doing their job or are already integrated well into that movement, and which parts are being forgotten about or neglected, or they're not getting their chance to contribute in the way that they could do. So, it might be that we're talking about noticing a certain amount of mobility or stuckness somewhere in the length of the spine or in the ribs. It might be that we look at reaching and we want to see, okay, again, like, what are you using of yourself to reach? Is it just this that you're using, or is it just this area of the chest and the shoulder, or is it, I actually shifted my weight as I did that, so I was already kind of getting to the end where it's like, are you also shifting your weight? You know, is it also your eyes? So again, we're kind of like looking at a very small or simple, apparently simple movement. And by looking at something so apparently simple, you can see the really infinitely complex expression of that individual person. And actually that's what's so fascinating about when you teach group classes, is that you get to see, you know, and as a teacher, when you're learning to teach Feldenkrais, you do a lot of observing, of course, and you gradually get to see how a simple instruction like look up or look down is expressed in more ways than you can possibly imagine. You know, you say lift your arm and you get a room full of 60 people doing it differently, or you say shift your weight side to side and you get a room full of people with completely different strategies. And that's again why it's so important to be like, cool, that's not right or wrong, that's the way you're doing it. And do you have other ways of doing it? You know, can we expand on that? Because maybe only ever having your weight shifted onto your left leg is going to start to be a bit painful or like challenging. Or, you know, what about your right leg? Can you like your right leg as well? How can you integrate your right leg back into your self-image? You know, we're working a lot with not only how you're doing what you're doing, but how that relates to how you think you're doing what you're doing, which is why it's helpful to work with somebody else, right? Like we don't tend to work with mirrors, for example, but it's really interesting if there's this kind of constant back and forth between the teacher and the student, because it's no use the teacher telling the student, oh, you're doing it like this, when they can't feel it. They're not aware of that. So how do you create the conditions, again, optimal conditions for learning? How do you create the conditions in which somebody can become more aware of themselves, become more aware of what they're already doing? Because only from there can it really be a change that they have control over. They can choose, oh yeah, okay, I've got more choice to go this way or that way. And again, just another Feldenkrais quote, kind of principle, is if you know what you're doing, you can do what you want. So if you don't know what you're doing in the first place, how can you change that? You know, how can you change? If you don't know what it is that you're, like you said, when you lay down on the table, you're not aware that you could be more relaxed. So you're holding something that is functional when you're standing up in gravity, but when you lie down, that's not functional anymore, right? You could let that go. But your nervous system doesn't know that you could let that go. It's like that's a foreign concept. You haven't even entertained the thought. So how could you do it if you haven't even entertained the thought yet? You know. And then with the hands of the teacher goes like, what about this bit? And this is all non-verbal. You know, you're just like, so what about this bit? How's this bit relaxing? Or how does this bit feel? Or what does this bit like to do? And then the shoulder or the hip or the back or whatever gradually enters this conversation where it's like, oh, okay, yeah, fine. Yeah, I could relax a bit more. Like, oh, yeah, okay, I can move like this. So it's like this little conversations with different parts of the body. Yeah, this ongoing process of becoming aware, trying something, becoming aware again, trying something else, and then always coming back to the function. So how does this improve your side bending? And how can your side bending make it easier for you to reach? And how can your reaching release that part in the base of your neck which is giving you pain? Or, you know, how can us improving your reaching allow you to shift your weight, which can ease off some of the pain you're getting in your hip, for example. But we're always, the last thing I'll say on this is just that we're always trying to get out of the way of thinking, which is like, I've got this pain and I've got this problem and I want to fix it, or can you fix me? And we're moving away from that and going like, okay, so here's a thing that exists for you. That's interesting. What else is there? You know, because if it's like, oh, I got pain in this side of my hip all the time, it's like, okay, so let's explore that a bit. But what about the other hip? When did you last think about the other hip? And, that's like, oh my God, I've got a left hip as well as a right one. Because, when you start to deal with things like pain or discomfort, that just, again, we get back to how all of this is already always embodied. It's always already in the mind. It's like, if you can only think about this thing as a problem, if you can only think about this thing as pain, that's dominating all of your other potential experiences. So how can we give you some other experiences? Like, feel this pleasure, feel this movement, be curious about this. Expand your awareness into other parts of your body, which will literally, and I'm talking about chronic pain now, but other parts of your body which literally lose representation in your brain, in your sensory motor cortex. You neglect something, you don't use it, it kind of atrophies a bit. The less you move it, the less you sense that area. I'm touching here for some reason because it's really common in these upper ribs, and we're often dealing with this area in a lot of people. The less you use it, the less you're aware of it, the less you're aware of it, the less you use it. And it just kind of perpetuates this kind of dying away of this part of yourself in your own brain, So people have really these quite revelatory experiences where it's like, oh my God, I've got ribs up here, or like, for some people, it's like, I've got a rib cage. Like, it sounds so stupidly basic because you can look at a skeleton and everybody knows they've got a rib cage, but like, have you felt it? Do you know what it can do? It's like,
yeah.
Oh my God, the potential.
It's like a weird feeling when you get reminded about stuff that you've forgotten about. And I was having this conversation earlier today, actually, with someone where we were talking about, you think you've got one problem, but actually doesn't exist to just tell it's not there to tell you exactly what is happening. It's there to just keep you surviving. And so it's like your parents telling you a lie because they know it's easier than telling you the truth right now. And maybe you'll get to the later bit, but what were we talking about? It was something about like, actually, how did it take me so long to realize I didn't like loud noises? Like, surely that should be really obvious. Like, it's too loud, but for the brain is like, well, you can't do anything about that, so I'm going to tell you that guy over there is an asshole.
Yes.
I'll make you angry about something you can control, because that's going to feel much better knowing that you've got control over it than knowing you're in a hostile environment that you can't change.
And again, like, back to habit, just the way that we grow and the way that we kind of come into being in the world, so much is in response to things outside of ourselves, but we only respond to things outside of ourselves through our own body, sensation, thinking, feeling, etc. And we're just trying to make sense of stuff. And of course we make sense of stuff in crazy ways. Again, like, there's no right or wrong. There's just literally us trying to be okay, us trying to survive. You'll learn, your body will know that you've got an aversion to loud sounds, but like you said, we're not encouraged to listen to the body or pay attention. So then you get these kind of things where, we talk, I think a lot of people talk about like being disconnected from the body or something, as if that's possible. Like, it's not possible. You are your body. That's it. Your body is telling you everything. But yes, you can probably get better at understanding what it's telling you, being in dialogue with it, realizing that it is actually you. Like, when your body is having a bad reaction to something, like, that's you having a bad reaction to something, So when you can connect the dots and you're like, oh, I notice I have this reaction to loud sounds. It's like, you can learn from the body how you think or feel about that thing, So as we said before, you can go through the body and learn something about your thinking and your feeling, or you can go through your sensation, through your movement, and learn something about your way of thinking or behaving, let's say. So, but we're not often in environments where we are encouraged to listen in that way to the body and we are still in the education system as it exists in our bit of the world now, still not often encouraged to pay attention or give value to your own experience. And just that, I mean, I think in my bubble, that's becoming really normal. Like, but you see the people who I follow on Instagram and the, the kind of somatic dancers and practitioners and body workers and, like really any interesting yoga teacher these days will be telling you to notice and sense and to slow down and pay attention to these questions. Like, they give you questions the questions guide you to notice more about yourself. But I'm aware that it's a really small bubble and that it's just still not at all the norm. And so I do feel that Feldenkrais is pretty radical still in that sense, that it's giving you time to notice. And that is, I mean, especially, you have to not get into talking about education. I have to not get into talking about capitalism, but especially under capitalism, it's a radical act to take even 10 minutes to lie down on the floor and just not have to do anything. Like, what about just noticing, And that's, of course, that's like where it kind of crosses over with a mindful practice. But I think it's just so essential. Like, it all begins with just giving yourself a moment to notice.
Yeah.
The potential from there. Because again, it's great to do this practice, but you're not doing it just to be good at this practice, and you're not doing Feldenkrais to be good at Feldenkrais. You're doing Feldenkrais so that you can sit more comfortably or move more comfortably or, whatever else it is you want to do more comfortably. And so you can't move forwards in that unless you begin with a taking stock, so there's always a body scan, there's always noticing first. And that's, not common at all, and a powerful thing to do.
Absolutely, yeah. That's, I mean, it's one of the ones where I always want more people to do it, but it's the buy-in or it's still for a lot of the time, it just seems weird. It's still like, why would I do that? Like, why? And I get it to some extent because a lot of the mindfulness practices, when the reason they became so well known was because somebody found a way to monetize it. And then you get the most diluted version, which is just, do 10 breaths and think about what you're thinking. And it's like, all right, well, how's that going to help? Probably not at first until you kind of figure out the rest of looking at yourself, like being able to look at yourself, being able to give yourself time. When you start throwing in, meditation or mindfulness as, here's the 5-minute version that you don't need to stop life. You can do it in your car on the way to work while you're drinking your coffee. And it's like, maybe actually you're losing too much of what it was supposed to be, like dedicate time to you.
Yeah. I don't know. I think there are really different approaches to Feldenkrais that you'll find with different teachers. And some teachers will definitely be really, really strict about what is and isn't Feldenkrais. And, the method works because we are strict about it. Like, it's functional. I go through this series of tests. I use this series of techniques of verbal or non-verbal communication. We go through these certain patterns of movement. We create these kind of physical riddles where the body has to work out non-habitual ways of doing something. So all of these kind of tools that we can use that fall under the category of what is a Feldenkrais lesson. But I do think there's a lot that can be, I just want people to benefit. If people can benefit in any way, great. Don't do an hour, do 5 minutes. Like, I'd much rather somebody does 2 minutes than continues to close their eyes and go through life ignoring all of their pain until they can't anymore, and then they are out of work and have like realized that they haven't given themselves any positive attention since they had their first child, or like all of the things that are so common, and then again people come finally up against the wall before they have to do anything, and it's just like, look, here are these little things that you could do. So I'm always stealing from the method and like infiltrating other areas with it. And like even I still teach a Pilates class, and I think probably people always come to Pilates because they know what it is. They don't know what Feldenkrais is. But then people keep coming to my Pilates class because I don't teach it like a regular Pilates teacher, I'm putting in lots of developmental movement patterns and lots of functional movement training and lots of somatic stuff, mindfulness, listening, etc. And like a lot of people, honestly, I think they need to pay somebody else to go to a class so that somebody else can tell them, lie down. Like, that's it, because it's just so difficult to tell yourself to do that. So like, even though it's not Feldenkrais, like Feldenkrais is this massive, complex and sophisticated method, generally we have a lie down and you just take your attention to your body and you notice. And like, I'm always championing, just have a little lie down, like that, maybe that's enough. Like, imagine if everybody who was working in an office or working on a shop floor or whatever it is, like if we just normalize like having a little lie down, like how much healthier we'd all be, how like much longer our spines would be at the end of the day compared to like this compression that we're living under all the time and trying to ignore because it's not socially acceptable to have a little lie down.
Yeah, I know that feeling too well. Like for me, it's being sick. Like I could I'll go into work on fire, and somebody says go home, I'll be like, yeah, no, it should be fine. I think I'll be fine. Which, yeah, like, and I'll know. It's like, yeah, you shouldn't be doing this. But the amount of mental energy it takes me to just make that decision, if someone else would just say, look, go home, stop, this isn't good for you, it just makes it much easier.
It's so difficult. And I think, it's always worth acknowledging as the teacher or as the practitioner, like, I don't teach these things because I'm a complete master and I don't have those problems. Like, no, I teach these things because I need it as well. Like it's so difficult to make yourself do the thing you'd benefit from doing, even though if it was somebody else you were talking to or somebody else you were looking at, it would be like, just go home. Like, what are you doing? It's obvious, right? But yeah.
It's probably in the thing that's related to what you do as well. Like for a lot of people, the reason they got into Feldenkrais for healthcare or something is because they already know they're really bad at that thing. So that's the thing that's become their hobby or their practice. So it's like, oh, well, you're the nerve guys. How come you can't take proper care of this? And it's like, because that's what was wrong in the first place. That's why I dedicated so much of my life to this.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask a little bit because there was something that I also wanted to bring up about my sessions that I've got a feeling, given what you said about the thinking, feeling, sensing, moving, is probably something that comes up often with the Feldenkrais sessions. And in my experience, it was like that of like a hallucination. So I remember specifically it was my right shoulder and left hip. And the first time it happened, it was pretty intense. Like just out of nowhere, got this vision of being back at my parents' house and like this garden, standing in this one place. And pretty much every single time that I've done a session with you, even if it's been voice guided or not, I've had that same same like vivid hallucination. And I think maybe by the final time, it might be the fact that I was expecting it to have, like it, because it was so intense and so weird the first time, that probably every other time since is like, oh, you're going to start thinking about this again. And because I'm going to start thinking about it. Of course I do. But that was a really interesting thing to me. And I wonder, like, do you get a lot of reports of that kind of thing, whether it's on the vivid images or just certain specific thoughts, or I guess the sense of sensation or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think it's really common, first of all. Yeah. And it's not that everybody will. It's not that that's something that has to happen, you know. And again, it's just an interesting thing to notice. You know, it's not like the teacher can tell you, oh, that's about this thing. You know, you're not. I'm not going to suddenly switch into a psychologist mode and like tell you where that's come from or what that's about, or, you know, suddenly start reading your astrological chart or something in order to decode. You know, like I'll stay within the bounds of what I know about, but it's really common. And one way that we can think about it is, again, if you can get past the mind-body duality, if you can kind of get your head around, even in the way that we talk about it, like get your head around the idea that everything you experience is already embodied. Everything you think has a corresponding feeling, movement. You know, we just, movement is life. We don't exist without movement. Movement exists in the world, in the environment around you, in relation to other people, but also, of course, in your own body. So as we're growing, as we're forming memories, you know, as we're building the shape of who we are, both physically and psychologically and in relation, again, to other people, we go through experiences. We you know, everything that forms us is a response to experiences. And so it kind of makes sense that you will have certain associations. You know, if you think of it in a very basic level, like if you're dealing with the nervous system and you know, for example, that there are like different ways that the nervous system functions. So if we just go to the very like rest and digest mode of the nervous system versus fight, flight, freeze, fawn, or whatever, you know, are you in a kind of high tension state, whether that's positive or negative, whether it's like action or fear or whatever, or are you in a mellow state where you can think easily or let your mind drift, rest and digest, you know. Those are really clear physiological states, but they come really clearly with a kind of psychological association. There's not a single psychological association, there's a whole palette, there's a whole infinite combination of the things you might be thinking and feeling, but they fall within these two different sort of states of activation or deactivation of the nervous system. And so, you know, you might see a child might see a dog and have an automatic response, which is like a fear, like aliveness, or another child might see a dog and have an automatic response, which is like, woo, everything's so great, I love dogs. And those are completely two different reactions, but very clearly embodied reactions. Like, and for whatever reason you have that reaction in the first place, your body learns that. And so a lot of the time we're dealing with what has your body learned, you know? And so if you kind of flip that around, then you might think like, oh, I feel this thing in my body. It's like, oh, that's when I feel that, I associate that with that giant dog that I saw when I was 7, you know, or like whatever it is that has become an association with a certain feeling. And so we get much more subtle and much more refined than that. And it's not just like, am I scared or am I chilled out? It's like, if somebody, like, what's the association between a movement and the thinking that's happening and the feeling that induces or whatever, or between the thinking and feeling that you're experiencing and the movement that induces, you know? So again, it just might be that there was something formative there was some experience. When you had whatever that experience was, you moved your body in a certain way that was a learning moment for you that is written into you now, and there's some association with that, so yeah, lots and lots of people do get sort of like memories, or again, because we're sort of moving the pieces of the puzzle. So you might have memories, or you might also, again, it's not that it's guaranteed that you're going to have this emancipatory experience, but like potentially you reorganize the bits of the puzzle and like something changes in your way of thinking, and you go, okay, I was stuck with that association, and now I realize I don't have to have that association every time, or and of course memory is a big part of that, because we learn through embodying experience, which is the same as saying creating memories.
Yeah, and I think that is the big thing of not like just let the experience happen. Like, don't try and read too much into it. I was quite lucky because it was just really cool for me, and it was not, in my opinion, a super emotionally charged. Like, maybe it was somewhere, but like for me, it was just, oh, look, this is the garden. I know that. Whereas I'm sure if it was like a traumatic childhood experience or something, I might go, oh, but what does it mean? I need to know why is that sitting there? I find it funny to watch, like, in other people where you see learned behaviors like that. Like my girlfriend, the first person I've ever seen in my life with a wasp nearby, just totally calm, chilled. And I watched it, just like, wow, I didn't know it was an option. Like for me, it's just straight away, it's like, well, I've just become a ninja, and I cannot stop that. That's just, when there's a wasp, that's who I am. And that was nice, but I guess that is also the pathway towards like chronic patterns, and some things are just how you behave and they never cause a problem, and they can become habitual, but some things are causing you problems in some way, and then you might end up learning that, and that becomes a chronic pattern, whether it's your pain, whether it's just a specific behavior, like you think you're lazy because you just don't take action when you think you're supposed to, or something like that. And I guess that's probably one of a big area for Feldenkrais. When you say people come to you because nothing else has worked, what kinds of things do you see often, or what kinds of chronic complaints do you normally deal with?
I mean, for example, sort of dispersed pain, or just general pain. I mean, obviously back pain is incredibly common.
Yeah.
So chronic back pain is really common. And that might be like, some problem with the neck, or some problem with the hips, or like, people come with things that have become a problem over time, or they come with things where like it's clear they had an injury and never quite rehabilitated after that thing, or but then there's a lot of like, I want to sort of talk about like reframing how we experience something, and there's a lot of the kind of the attachment to the problem, and as you were just saying, can we just notice that thing? Or like somebody, for example, somebody who does have a history of trauma will know very clearly, even if they don't know consciously, but they can be made to become aware consciously that, for example, certain positions or postures will be re-traumatizing. So, you learn, maybe you're going to a yoga class or something to get some agency back over your body after a traumatic experience, and you learn that certain postures or poses are too much for you, and like you could go towards that thing, but you don't want to, like if we're talking about trauma, you don't want to trigger yourself into putting yourself back into the traumatic experience through putting yourself into a physical posture or position, which automatically reminds your nervous system like you are not in control, you know. So we want to reframe something so that eventually you could have, you could move through that position or that posture, but you're doing so in an environment where you are completely in control. It's absolutely up to you how far you go, when you stop, etc. So it's really like building the agency of the person who's going through that thing. And again, we do that through reframing how you experience something by making it safe, whether it's from psychological trauma, whether it's from an emotional trauma, like you anybody who has had any injury knows if you've twisted your ankle or whatever, you've broken something, your body will not want to go there anymore, you know, and we create whole new sets of problems just because we're then afraid of doing something that's going to aggravate the current problem. And actually, as we now know, it's really important to go there and to move that ankle that you don't want to move, and it's important to load it with weight even though you don't want to. But it's important to do it in a way that's safe, in a way where you're conscious of what you're doing, in a way where you can choose like, yeah, I can do this movement another couple of times, or like, oh no, just once today, or like, oh, actually not at all right now, you know? So really being alive to what your experience is. And then when we're dealing with something chronic, the real challenge, and I think this is always the challenge, is, you know, what is my limit? Like, how much is too much? How much is enough? Because we don't want to never challenge somebody. You know, we want to make it safe to be challenged. We want to take you to the boundary, to the edge of your range, and know where that is, and then be like, oh, actually, I'm not so sure. Maybe I could do more, or like, it's really making things less binary. It's like, it's not like, ow, avoid. It's like, I'm not sure. Is this okay? Is this pain? This is okay. No, that's not pain. Oh, no, I don't want to go there. It's like this really live thing. And so, yeah, people come, this to circle right back to the question you actually asked me, people come with all kinds of chronic conditions. And that might be mental health conditions. They're not necessarily coming, you know, I can't fix somebody's depression, for example. Like, no, that's clinical depression. I'm not going to fix that. But we can reframe it. We can give them a different experience of their body. We can give them a different experience of their life, of how they can take up space in the world, of how to be comfortable, or just even just the power of like being with another person and experiencing acceptance, you know? So there's like a lot of really, really powerful things where, whether it's to do with rehabilitating from an injury, I've done quite a lot of work with postpartum women, and actually just mothers who kind of just feel that they've lost their body, you know, like if you have a child and then of course you become completely at the mercy of the child. Everything you do is to serve this other being. Can be really helpful to have somebody help you experience your own body again. So one of the loveliest bits of feedback I ever had was somebody who came to me for back problems and then afterwards said, oh, you know, they wrote to me, I think like a week or so later, and said, I never, since having twins, I haven't experienced my own body for myself. I feel like I've got my body back and it feels good, you know. That's amazing. So yeah, life. People come because of life.
Oh man, yeah, that's powerful.
Life.
And I really liked the thing you said about safety, of that. Like, you're not just making people Well, you can make people feel safe by just putting a bubble around and just not letting anything bad happen. But actually, it's not that. It's, if you're going to be working on something threatening, and whether you're going to call it, you're working on the weakest link, that's like the thing that's causing you all the problems. You are challenging that. You're just making everything else safe around it. So it's like, all right, what's the safest possible conditions so that this becomes the least threatening version that it can be, I guess. Whereas maybe in the sports world, you do the opposite. If you're playing to your absolute best strength, you want to throw all the difficulty that you possibly can at that, which, they...
Even in that, like a kind of elite sport situation, for optimal learning, there's this thing where you want the challenge to be enough, but not too much, right?
Yeah.
If you're not challenging somebody enough, they're not going to be learning. But if you challenge them too much, they're out of their depth, and equally they can't learn. They're just learning how to panic or how to fail or whatever. So it's about finding like what is the right level at any given moment for learning to take place, basically.
Yeah. So I just realized I've kept you way longer than I said I would. So if it's okay, I want to ask you one more thing, which was about, because I know we've talked a lot about the Feldenkrais sessions, but you also run slightly different kinds of classes. And the two that I found most interesting, you mentioned one about working on a project working on touch, and also one, I remember you said in the description, was it was even possible to do this from your bed. It's a movement class, but actually this is going to be bare bones. Like it's really going to, I guess, inclusive of pretty much anyone can do this. And so, and touching on just those, because I really wanted to hear about them and I don't want to miss it.
So thanks for asking. The bare bones one that you just described, I was calling movement medicine. And really a lot of the time I'm just trying to make my practice more accessible and help more people with it. And I'm aware, of course, that anybody who is suffering from chronic fatigue or any chronic illness, even, now the amount of long COVID sufferers we have, it can feel really, really too risky, too dangerous to attend a normal class of any kind. And so I wanted to offer something anybody can join. Even if you don't have any chronic pain or chronic condition or long COVID or anything, and you just want to go really, really, really minimal and really, really restful for a while, because we can create enormous change in the nervous system, which is in the body and in movement, in thinking, in feeling. Just even through imagining. In fact, we use the imagination a lot in Feldenkrais. And when you're sort of even doing sports training or something, you can visualize doing something and improve your performance through a combination of training the movement and imagining doing it. So imagination is a big tool that we use. And so in these sessions, we're kind of working more with sensing and imagining, and staying with a range of movement, which makes it possible for example, for somebody to still stay in their bed and participate in an online class with their camera off, for example, where, again, as I said earlier, with the tests that we do, like in the beginning of a one-to-one session, for example, what does it feel like to lift your arm, or what does it feel like to shift your weight, or what does it feel like to bend to the side, or like very simple things, we can get to the essence of a movement in something absolutely tiny. So for example, I could be lying on my side in bed and breathing. I'm literally just lying on my side in bed and breathing. And if I can tune into that, I become aware that there is a pattern of side bending already occurring in breathing just because of the position that I'm lying in. Yeah. And then, of course, if you were to lie on your other side, you would notice, how do I side bend on this side compared to the other side? Which ribs can I feel moving? So, for example, somebody who is, training circus, wanting to get into a position on straps where you're like twisted and side bending to an extreme, in a meat hook or something on a trapeze, or you are playing basketball and you want like the maximum jump and the maximum reach, literally from the tip of one toe that's leaving the floor to the tips of the finger that are reaching up to push the ball. It's a side bend. That's it. It's like, Of course it's complex, of course it's power, of course it's like how you use your muscle, of course there's so many other things. I'm not saying that's all there is to it, that if you just lie on your side, you'll then become the ultimate basketball player. So it's a bit more than that, of course. But because we're looking at very essential movement patterns, really the most important thing is just to keep moving. And that's what I want to offer people in those movement medicine sessions, is like, just move. Because if you have got an association with movement of like, that's no longer for me, especially if somebody's dealing with something chronic or is bedridden a lot of the time, that's the time you most need movement. That's not the time you need less because you feel less capable and so just give up entirely. It's like you've got to be more attuned to how much is too much and stop way before, not when it's already too much, but before. So it's really about learning what's okay and what's not okay, and working on a really, really, really small level so that we can basically keep all of the joints and muscles moving, but without it being a potential like shock to the system, in the context where if you do 5 or 10% of what we do in class, even if what we're doing in class is really minimal, if you need to rest for 80% and work for 20% instead of work for 80% and rest for 20%, then great, do that, and you are doing what you need to do, and that's empowering in itself, So, yeah. And then the other thing you asked about was the touch work, and I just noticed it's kind of grew organically out of what I'm teaching a lot anyway. So I'm developing this workshop in touch at the moment, which is hopefully going to pop up in a few different places in Europe over the next year or so. And I just started to develop that because obviously it is essential. Obviously after the pandemic, it's ongoing, but after the kind of intense 2020 version of pandemic that we experienced, I think people in general became much more aware of the importance of physical contact. And that's just something I have always worked with and felt I could offer a way into. So the workshop basically can be tailored to be suitable for the general public, or can be more tailored to people, artists in performance training, practitioners working with the body, maybe body workers and therapists, or even non-physical therapists who are just interested in touch and relation, how we relate. So the idea is to make us, in the same way that we can become more aware of our own sensation and our own experience. What does it feel like if I move in a certain way? What does it feel like if I move in this way as opposed to this way? What do I like? What does that communicate to myself? What does that communicate to the world? So we'll look at the same things through touch, different qualities of touch, what we communicate through touch. And of course, they'll have to be, that there will be a kind of base level of consent. Obviously that has to be dealt with before we can do anything else. And then working with self-touch as well, so learning different ways of being in contact with our own body, and then finally different ways of being in contact with other bodies, which is, again, it's all of life, isn't it? It's why it's difficult to be, we can make it expressive for theatre or performance training, because of course if you grab somebody by the shoulder, you can do that in 100,000 different ways and communicate something completely differently, even if you don't actually even make contact in the end. But equally, that's our interpersonal relationships, So it's just like we do with movement. I want to use the touch element of Feldenkrais and kind of apply it to different scenarios and explore that vocabulary a bit. Because I think we basically just live within a certain range without realizing the potential that we have. And like in the same way that I might get limited in how I'm moving, and if I'm not realizing that I'm limiting how I move, I won't know that I could be experiencing life in Technicolor. It's the same with touch. Like if we don't know that we touch in a habitual way, or maybe we do know, but we don't have the tools to do it in any other way. And obviously it's a bit scary to play with, well, how do I contact somebody else? How do I make physical contact? It's a bit scary. So we'll just create a really safe environment where we can kind of explore different qualities of touch. And yeah, as I said, what we communicate with that.
Yeah, that's Philip. Oh, I think that's really important now. Like anything where I read about the benefits of touch, just from a neural level, before anything else, you go like, oh man, this is so important. But then in the world, it just seems like it's happening less and less. And sometimes that's for really good reasons. And there's really good reasons why we might not want to just say everything that used to be okay was okay. But if that means losing all the really good stuff as well, that's probably not such a good thing. So yeah, I don't know. I think that's a really good thing to have happening now. And I wonder even as well, like people, because it's a lot of people miss touch and so would jump at the chance, but also some people find touch anxiety provoking in the first place, and actually maybe creating a safe space to get used to it and explore it and decide what it is. Is it just you don't like touch, or is it you don't like touch like this or like this, or having somewhere where you can discover that might actually open up a lot more possibilities to you, which is really great.
Yeah, and exactly as you said, it begins with this safe environment where maybe somebody will participate in 20% of the workshop, or just in the stuff that doesn't actually involve making contact with somebody else, and that's where they're at, and that's welcome. So it's not, I'm definitely never in the game of forcing things upon people, but just making invitations and giving tools that people might be interested to try out.
Yeah, nice. All right, so I'm way over my time with you, so that we didn't cover half the stuff I wanted to talk about. Maybe another time we might be.
This is what happens with you and me, James. This is
Maybe we'll see. Some other time we'll get to do all the Feldenkrais in circus and theater and all that. But for now, like I just want to say, first of all, thank you very much for coming and joining me for this. For anyone listening, I just highly recommend, regardless of whether it's you want to look at something in particular, or I just really recommend the experience of that, zooming in on yourself, like trying Feldenkrais out just for the idea, like just to see how these small movements, small ideas, all of that stuff can actually affect you. So I would definitely recommend Rosamund as a practitioner and as a person. So do get in touch. What are the kind of ways, Rosamund, if people want to look you up, get in touch? I don't know whether it's book anything, find out what's going on. How can you do that?
Thank you. So I have a website, which is rosamundmartin.com. And there you can find more information about my performance training and the kind of artistic work that I do as a performer, director, choreographer, and then how that relates to all of the technical and functional movement training that I do. You can find more information about Feldenkrais on the website as well, and some info on regular classes that I teach. If you're interested in Feldenkrais particularly or specifically, I teach just one public drop-in class at the moment. That's at 6:05 UK time on a Monday evening on Zoom every week. and you're welcome to drop into that. Get in touch via my website or on social media. I am mostly on Instagram at Rosamund Martin Moving Bodies. So yeah, website gives you email contact or Instagram.
Awesome. Cool. So let's leave it there. Rosamund, thanks again for coming.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we'll see you again.
Yeah.